can never win. Try not to begin. That said, please don't come find me. Why don't you people try spending some of your time thinking of something else besides tearing others down? You can never win. Get under my skin. Can't say you didn't wound me once, and I thank you all for that. You can try to hurt me, but you don't hurt anymore. And I need you all for that. But you can take your opinion and suffer fools of your own. I never wanted life to be someone else's broken mirror, forfeit a reflection of my own. I could never win, why would I begin? But you're welcome to keep drinking that poison. Down, 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 down. And I thank you all for that. You can try to hurt me, but you don't hurt anymore. And I need you all for that. But you can take your opinion and suffer fools of your own. Moving on, moving on, moving on, moving on. And I thank you all for that. You can try to hurt me, but you don't hurt anymore. And I need you all for that. But you can take your opinion and suffer fools of your own. And I thank you all for that. You can try to hurt me, but you don't hurt anymore. And I need you all for that. But you can take your opinion and suffer fools of your own.
Oh, here you are, face to face in this trashy bar. Another glass and I am going places. Makes me laugh about the irony of everything. I like the way you're thinking. I don't really care about the music on the dance floor. I don't really mind all the smokers in the bathroom. I don't care at all, baby, you got my attention. So you were saying, oh no, I don't see the logic of things. It's quite a lonely world that we're living in. Oh baby, you are something special, I'm sure. Everything makes total sense when you're next to me. Times another drink and I'll go anywhere. The way you smell, like a flash in the universe. You are illuminating. I don't really care about the people in the bar line. I don't really mind all the who goes doing stage dives. I don't care mean to show you I will never let you go. No, 'cause you don't see the logic of things. It's quite a lonely world that we're living in. Oh baby, you are something special, I'm sure. Everything makes total sense when you're next to me.
I'm focused. I've been watching for the omens. I've been listening to everything you said. It's been running through my head like
Yo! What's up, everyone? Happy Saturday. Love seeing the chat is very vibrant this morning. Everyone's on their A game. I love it. I love it. I love it. We have a special live stream for you all today. Melissa Coates is joining us from Coates Data Strategy. How are you today, Melissa?
I am doing great. How are you?
Living the dream, as always. Awesome. Yeah, so Melissa Coates is the owner of Coates Data Strategies. So you can go over to that website and check out everything she has there. She's an MVP. She's co-written the Power BI enterprise deployment white paper with Chris Webb. There was a big update to that back in May. That is a massive white paper if you want some light reading before bed. That is a great one to go do. Yes. So Melissa, thank you for hanging out with us on this Saturday with everyone. I know Patrick ended up leaving me. But you were gracious.
No, well, I'm happy to join in and keep you company this morning.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And we've got some good stuff. So the format for today's live stream is going to be a little bit different. So Melissa and I've got some questions specifically for Melissa. We're going to talk about a few things, maybe for the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so. And then we'll go to open chat. There will not be a member only chat today. So Chatmaster C is backstage, and we've talked about maybe some way we can work on making sure member questions get priority. So just be aware of that. Jeff Johnston, thank you so much for becoming a member, and also Melissa, thank you for becoming a member as well. It's very much appreciated. So speaking of members, just a shout out to all the members of Guy in a Cube. We definitely appreciate the support that you do to help us continue doing what we do. It definitely goes a long way, and we very much appreciate it. There's a join button down below or off to the side if you're on a mobile device. If you want to learn more, no pressure, just a big thanks for us if you do decide to help with that. Also, if you are new to Guy in a Cube or just new to the live stream, put hashtag new in the chat. We always love seeing the new folks around. It always amazes me how many new folks are present and here to learn and ask questions and hear answers. So just love hearing that. Orange Man Bad is new. Babajid is new. Love it.
Welcome. It's awesome.
I don't know if Thomas is in the chat. Thomas always usually has a funny thing. Johnny's new. Jason is new to the live stream, but has watched the videos for years, so love that. Nico is new. Bavesh is new. Olksander is new. Yes, and Kevin is not new, but back. Love hearing that as always. Jed is new. Awesome. Alex is here. Don't worry. Alex is here. Hey, Alex, program is ready with the links, so we are good to go for that. Yes.
He's the link
always.
master.
All right, Melissa, so you've had a long journey with just data in general as well as business intelligence, and I know you were we've known each other in the SQL community for years. One of the things with Power BI, I know you've been there since the beginning. You have put together an end-to-end diagram of the Power BI service. And it's an amazing diagram. I'm sure it took a lot of time. Let's put it up on the screen here. So you can go download this from the Coates Data Strategy website. The link is on the top there. And you can see there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And there's a history behind this too, right? I think you had, when did this first come out? When did you first do this?
Yeah, so if I flip to the how it started and how it's going
Nice.
side of things, back in 2015 is when I initially started it. And it's because I found myself writing the same thing on the whiteboard, talking to a customer over and over about, well, here's how things connect up to each other. So I formalized it really just to help myself. And then, of course, I put it on my website. And then community people started offering suggestions. I started seeing it be used in the community, which is so exciting to see it used out in the wild. And it's evolved ever since. So I try to refresh it at least a couple times a year. It just depends on what's going on. So the most recent refresh is here in January. So it's as good as it can be for the moment.
Nice. Can you put the big one up with the URL back just so people can see that if they missed it?
You betcha.
And then what was, when putting this together, I know like when Patrick and I work on things, either videos or other items, we always tend to learn something. Was there something that you learned when putting this together? Or something that surprised you?
Well, I suppose certainly it exposes some pieces of things that I don't always necessarily know deeply, almost like certifications do, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's just all about awareness. And that's actually really the point of this is awareness that there is some sort of integration point or interoperability or whatever that exists. And if I actually tried to put lines between all of them, I would go insane. So I actually dropped the vast majority of those. And what I'd like to do, if I get some time a little bit later on this year, is start evolving it so that there's later pages where we would almost zoom in to certain pieces, and then we would get more granularity for actual relationships and lines and that sort of thing. But, we'll see how time goes. But yeah, I mean, I certainly learn more than anybody when I put together a community resource.
Yes, absolutely. And so when we think about governance and deployment, things of that nature, what's kind of the top challenge that you've seen for folks?
Well, there's two or three, but my favorite one that anybody that's heard me talk will not be at all surprised to hear me bring this up is the awareness of we don't need a data set in the PBIX file for every single report. And I think that's just an easy thing for the newer authors to take a little while to realize that as they do a save as on a PBIX file to do a separate set of reports, that data set does not have to get duplicated every time. And before you know it, you have X number of data sets that you have to maintain that are all so very similar to each other. So that's kind of the biggie that ends up being a big challenge to organizations that don't make a conscious effort to use shared data sets.
Yes. And I love the updates have come with shared data sets as well. And I know sometimes folks are challenged on the shared data set side in terms of like there used to be restrictions on it, like because it was a live connection, and so some of the composite model updates have kind of helped that a little bit as well. So that's always good to see.
No question. So yeah, there's a lot for us to learn there, right? It actually switches the live connection to a direct query, which then gives us all a little something to learn about, well, what's the actual distinction between the two in terms of there being an actual local model, even though it's schema only, that reaches in, and then we can expand upon it with our own specific additional data sources. So that's a really great way to start marrying up enterprise BI with self-service BI. But I like to also say that this idea of a shared data set, or as Microsoft likes to call it these days, discipline at the core, so
Yes.
the data that's being reused, or flexibility at the edge with
Yes.
reports that are created by whomever needs to use them is not an IT only proposition. Even if all of the data is maintained by, let's say, the procurement business unit, they can absolutely use that pattern because
Yep.
it's a best practice. It doesn't have to be enterprise BI and it doesn't have to be IT managed.
Yeah, absolutely. So that the partnership is key. Typically the discussions I've had though is the central group. Sometimes it's hard for them to let go a little bit. And let some of that self-service, because there's fear of data exfiltration, or who owns the data, how's it managed, and so there's a lot of things around that governance and deployment where you can manage those aspects of it.
No question. And, defining who does own and manage it. And is that the same person as the subject matter expert, or is the technical owner different? Right. And actually how you use the concepts of steward, expert, owner, right? It kind of differs between different companies, but you're right. That's a huge thing to be really clear on, not just from a roles and responsibilities perspective, but from a getting things done every day perspective.
Yep, absolutely. Which leads me to the next item, which is great, is in terms of understanding some of those processes or strategies of governance and deployment. You actually have a new Power BI deployment and governance workshop, right? So tell me a little bit about that.
I do. I'm glad you asked. Essentially, what it is it's a series of 10 live sessions, and we go through the idea of data governance from a high level, and then evolve into talking specific strategies. So around how are you going to manage and deploy your content? One of my favorite areas is the data trustworthiness area, where we talk about certification a lot, because it's actually not quite as simple as you might think. And then content security and protection. I actually have 2 of the 10 sessions devoted to that because there's so darn much to think about. And then kind of rounding out the series with, adoption, auditing, administration kind of topics, so that from an end-to-end perspective, you've been introduced to, here's some of the things that you want to think about. And everybody implements things differently.
Yep.
And my job is to give you things to consider. If you approach this in a centralized way, you might think about it this way. Whereas in another situation, it's a little different, and that sort of thing.
Yep. And so it's on, your current session is ongoing right now, and I know you've got sorry, I just saw that you did a whole slide for that, which is awesome. Your current workshop is going on right now, so that's is it too late? I'm assuming it's too late for folks to already join into that one.
I'm glad you asked, actually. I've had 2 people join in the last 48 hours.
Oh.
So session 1, so there are 10 of them, plus 2 alternate Q&As. Mm-hmm. And all of the details are at the URL you can see at the bottom of your screen right now. What's happening right now is we did start on Monday, so we have completed 3 of the 10 in terms of live sessions. So right now you have 2 options. If you joined and you want to catch up on all of the replays, you could do that and join us for the remainder of the live sessions. I actually have a couple of people down in, say, New Zealand, for instance, that are consuming it all in an on-demand way. So you certainly don't have an obligation to join the live sessions. Or you can wait for enrollment to open for the next series, which is going to start on April 13th. And I'm making a change to run it on Tuesday, Thursdays instead of Monday, Wednesday, Friday. To help us fit it all in amongst our responsibilities a little bit easier. And it won't be Friday night for people in Europe, which is, kind of a side effect of the current schedule.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, great to hear about that. Very excited about that course. I know a lot of people have been looking for something in that space to help with some knowledge.
I've had a lot of people email me and ask the following questions, and something to the effect of, I'm trying to get approval for this. So I feel like, I've hit on something that there really is an awful lot of interest in. And being self-employed and just me, being able to do this in a many-to-one kind of fashion instead of working with customers one-on-one is just more efficient. I'm real excited about it all.
All right, so let's get into some questions from the chat. So Chatmaster C is standing by. Be sure to put Q : in front of your question to get them queued up. We've already got a couple queued up. I'm going to prioritize questions around governance and deployment, maybe some admin type questions. And then if we run out of those, we'll just grab whatever's there and can go from that. As I said, there isn't a member chat only section, so members, definitely make sure that you get your questions in. Members are the ones with the green name in front of them. The moderators are standing by along with Chatmaster C. Please do not spam your question. We have a 3 strikes rule here at Guy in a Cube, and you will get put in a timeout. So that is the thing, and I can hear puppers barking in the background. I don't know why. Okay, so before we do it, one of the benefits of being a member at the visitor or producer tier is you can actually pre-submit your question. And we do have one question that was pre-submitted. So this was from, I'm going to say Aladdin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but when you have large data sets, so greater than 2 gigabytes in a premium workspace, what are the best practices, tips, and things to be aware from to do the following, like create, modify measures, add a new table to a data set, create, modify relationships? So what are those things we need to be concerned about when going with larger data? I don't know, Melissa, if you have any thoughts you want to throw out there about that?
I think we should kind of tag team this one. So the couple of things that come to mind for me initially are, first of all, when we're talking about a large data set, can you be also working in, say, a dev test kind of area? That could be a separate workspace, for instance, where you've got your data scaled down. That makes it a little bit easier for you to work with during the development process. And then when we're talking about migrating to production, tools like ALM Toolkit make a partial metadata deployment possible to where you're not necessarily needing to do a full deployment over everything again. So that can help from a manageability aspect, but I'm sure you have some things to add to that, Adam.
Yes. So part of my day job, we work with a lot of large enterprise customers working with scale of data. When I actually saw the 2 gigabyte, I was like, oh, it's actually pretty small. So it's a healthy size for sure. So one thing I like the phrase I've been using a lot recently is keep it simple and keep it clean, right? So as you get to that larger amount of data, the data model itself is going to be really important. The structure of it, how simple it is, not doing some crazy things like one large table with like 300 columns. Don't do that. And then star schemas are your friend. I'm going to put a link in the chat. Let's see if this actually works. There's a guidance doc out there about reducing your data model size. And you may think like, well, I'm not talking about reducing the size. I'm just talking about like, what do I need to consider when I have that large data? But go through these steps. There's a lot of good best practices in that guidance doc, just things you should be doing in general, which will pare down things. Again, making it simpler, making it smaller, making it cleaner. So those are all things that you should consider as part of that. So those are just big things. So for example, I've got one customer that's using a really large model. They're like billions of rows, and their fact table, it's like 12 columns. That's it. And they're all numbers, right? So they're not...
That's clean and simple.
Right. It's very clean, and yeah, it's very good.
Yeah,
so.
I'm sure you've seen some customers that start approaching Power BI initially as if it's an Excel replacement.
Always.
And working with,
Yes.
one large table, and then they figure out, I might need a separate date table. And then they figure out, make that natural evolution to learning why a star schema, or at least a loose star schema, is so valuable.
Yep. So star schema, absolutely. Look at that. Also, if you do want to get in, you're not totally familiar with star schemas, there is, in the guidance doc section, there is a article there about star schemas and why it's important to Power BI. And so I know Alex put the general link for the guidance as well. So thank you, Alex. See, sometimes I don't even have to use the "Hey Alex" command. It just reads my mind.
Nice. I think on SQL BI, didn't they recently add they've talked about it from time to time over years, but I think they've got a very new article on that as well that I remember seeing not too long ago.
I don't know if I saw that. I know they do have a like intro to data modeling course as well, where they do talk about it there.
True.
So I don't know if they did a recent item. They've been cranking out a lot of videos too.
Post.
So yeah. They crank out a ton of content. So the other thing you can do, I always recommend the Star Schema Complete Reference book. Absolute great book to have to go through to learn more. It's not specific to Power BI. It's just star schemas in general. It's just a good approach for data
I got
modeling.
that one over here too.
Nice. Awesome. All right, so let's see what else we've got here. Go to the queue. Lots of questions here. There was one that I already had. I kind of pulled up some, and I thought was a really good question, actually. This is not a member question. It's from Matthias. The question here was, is a company's data automatically deleted from the cloud if they end up deciding to terminate Power BI for whatever reason? So, and then how is this assured? I thought that was a great question. Melissa and I were actually talking about this beforehand. And I'm like, this is one of the things, there's nothing in the Power BI documentation that I know of that actually talks about this at all. And so I think, Melissa, you've even said like you've never even gotten that question before. That you've
No,
heard.
but it's a really good one in terms of, knowing how long it takes really for it to be finally purged behind the
Yes.
scenes, because of course it's all a managed service, and Microsoft has provisions in place for if you accidentally delete things that customers can recover.
Yep. So I'm going to put a link in here, and I haven't talked about it, so Alex is not going to beat me to this link. The Microsoft 365 data retention documentation, and let me jump over to my computer. So this document really calls out. So the thing about Power BI to understand is it's part of Microsoft 365 as well as the Azure platform. So it inherits a lot of the policies as part of that. And one of the things in the doc you can see, it talks about like customer data and whatnot in the event that it's deleted and what happens to those. So this would be the first thing I would reference. So it talks about active deletion is at most 30 days, passive deletion is 180 days. Look at the Azure version of this as well and take that into account. So those are ways that you can go figure out like what are the actual policies from a Microsoft standpoint, and Power BI inherits that from a service perspective. So just be aware of that. In terms of how you can be assured of that, I mean, this is the best I can give you in terms of that. This is the stated policies and what's going on behind the scenes. Obviously, there's, you can't like go into the actual data center and verify, oh, yep, that row was deleted or whatnot. The other thing I'll say about that also is this question also, it's a big, it depends because of the fact, there's something to be said about an individual user versus the whole tenant as a perspective. So from an individual user perspective, think about their My Workspace. And so if you delete that user, then the context of what that retention will be the My Workspace, right? So if they have content that they've also published to an app workspace, the app workspace itself is a tenant item, not an individual user item. So those aren't necessarily going to be deleted, right? Because there's other members and whatnot that are part of that. So it would only be in the context of your My Workspace, not the whole tenant itself.
Yeah, which is a great point, and one of the big things that we also like to reiterate a lot in that we don't want important organizational data to only reside in My Workspace.
Yes. Yes.
And so the side effect of what you just described is actually reduced risk of accidental deletion and people leaving the company and that sort of thing. So it's actually a very good thing.
Yes. Preach. do not put production data in your My Workspace, please. Let's see here. I'm just looking real quick. So Rishi's got one. Rishi's got, it seems like good governance practice to have separate workspaces for data flows, shared data sets, and then the reports and apps. But how do you stop the number of workspaces getting unmanageable? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a really tough one. So I agree with separation of data workspaces with report workspaces. And the biggest advantage to that by far is because then the permissions levels can be completely separate and you're not playing the game of, if I'm allowed to edit reports, I promise I won't touch the data sets or the data flows in the same workspace, right? And row level security, if you need it invoked, crossing workspaces with just the build permission, for instance, that will work. But you're right. Then suddenly we have, for maybe one set of workspaces, suddenly we have data and reports. We might have dev, test, and prod. So for one topic, we might be talking about 6 workspaces there, perhaps. So my first rule of thumb for planning workspaces is what's the topic and what's the security boundary. And so the game, of course, is not too granular and not too broad, because it's really tempting to just start with one workspace for your department or your organizational area. And while that might work sometimes that's just too broad to actually, hold up over time.
Love it. That is great.
Yep.
So my takeaway from that, Melissa, was that it depends.
It does depend. And I'm actually looking for something here real quick. So I've kind of got 3 levels that I talk about workspace organization, right? Level 1 is what's the content. And that's, the subject area, the security boundary that we just talked about. And then we want to think about level 2. How's the content managed, right? That's the data and the reports. That's the environment, dev, test, prod. Then we want to think about how are we delivering the content? So for instance, if we know we need to deliver it via an app, that might have us backing into the scope of a workspace because it's a one-to-one relationship. And then also if we need some premium features, that might have us backing in. So I've kind of got this multi-level evaluation that I do, so to speak.
Nice. Thanks. And Jessica commented that she loves the methodology, the topic, and security. So,
oh, yeah, I do too. Let's geek out on that for sure.
Alrighty. And then Dan just adding a little levity here. Why didn't Alberto's note? So he had an article about how to ask questions. Why didn't he say start your question with a Q colon in his great blog post and asking questions over at SQL BI? I love that. Marco did comment earlier. He said, look, this is about like how to ask questions in forums and whatnot. He said maybe they'll go back and ask about how to ask questions in the live chat. So yes.
I thought they were very gracious, saying that a lot of times the disconnect is that people are used to talking in person instead of, asynchronously on a forum post. And that's a very gracious way to put it, as opposed to people aren't just doing their homework and are being a little lazy and slapping a question out there, right? So I was kind of impressed with them being very diplomatic.
Yes. Well, and then Marco, you did a tweet, I think it was yesterday or the day before, just talking about that topic as well. Like, look, if you just want to put a really, add some substance to the question, if you don't want the answer to just be, it depends. And I know from a live chat perspective, that's hard because you're limited on the number of characters you can do. So, but in general, like for forum posts, things of that nature, if you're asking in face-to-face, like at a conference, you meet someone and you're asking a question, try to give specifics and context to it so that it's not just, it depends. Excellent. All right. Let's see here. We've got, let me go to, Kevin had a question here. So, is the division of consumer and government documents documented in the diagram that you have, Melissa? So how do you handle the difference between the commercial cloud versus government cloud and managing that information?
That's a fair point. And, really most of everything that I have ever done has been with the commercial cloud. So you're right. I do not make the distinction upon, what's different in the government cloud or any of the other private clouds. So no, I don't call that out. But Adam, correct me if I'm wrong. If I didn't see something recently that said there's more of a commitment now to get the other cloud platforms support more closely in alignment with the commercial, unless there's like a security or compliance reason that there's different, right? Within a certain number of days. Yes.
And Alex, thank you for putting the link there. I was about to say, hey, Alex, but he read my mind. I don't need to use the command. So there is a doc that talks about commercial versus government features. It does get updated occasionally. Yes. Traditionally it was kind of like a 3 to 4 week lag on some items, whereas like for a while, like data flows wasn't even available in the government cloud. A lot of that was predicated on the JEDI contract with Department of Defense with Microsoft. So there's some restriction or some compliance things that go along with that. And so those are items where they're trying to get closer in lockstep to make sure that things that are in commercial cloud are also available in the government clouds, and to keep that, going forward. What you mentioned also is very well. There may be like security restrictions or policy things that prevent certain items from lighting up in government cloud. So those are definitely things to be aware of. But in general, I know Microsoft is working on getting the impact a lot less than 3 to 4 week lag, or sometimes just a massive lag in terms of consistency between the two. So
That's great.
Yep. So good question. All right, let's see. So David's got one here. Are there any bad practices to avoid with Active Directory, Azure Active Directory groups when managing a large enterprise deployment? So any tips that make sense in terms of group structure or what should be there?
That's tough in a self-service BI environment. So a lot of times I'm always coming back to how are we using Power BI? Enterprise BI purposes, self-service BI purposes. So when we're using it in an enterprise way, it's much easier to say, let's tie certain security settings, let's say even workspace permissions, to certain groups. It's not always possible in the real world, but one approach you can try to take is, let's say I've got my sales workspace, and can I have 4 AAD groups for the admin, member, contributor, and viewer? In most cases in the self-service world, people aren't going to use that sort of approach. They're just going to go add Joe to the workspace and give them the permissions that they need. So I think it's a really tough question to answer, right, in terms of being able to get it done in the real world. But I think the thing that you would do is try to be as specific as possible and in lockstep with what the scope is of the thing that you're delivering. Adam, what do you think?
So I've actually, there's a customer I've been working with where this has actively come up, both in the sense of like workspace and app accessibility for group management, as well as like RLS role assignment. So the challenge that this customer had was they've got a bunch of people that they need to manage. So it's a big model that's corporate wide, and they need to add a lot of people in there, but they don't want to do that maintenance all the time of adding all, 500 groups and whatnot in and out, and how to maintain that. Now, one thing I pointed to, like the management of that is all based on Azure Active Directory, right? So we've got to have groups that are there. One of the things they were asking for was, can we have, like with local Active Directory, you have this option of saying like everyone or authenticated users. Like those are like inherent groups that are available from a local Active Directory perspective. That's not available in Azure Active Directory. So they're like, how do we get this in Power BI? Can we just have an everyone and just allow that in for like a default role in roll-up security or for the workspace? And one thing I pointed back is like from a Microsoft side, Microsoft actually has a security group that says all Microsoft employees. And then they've got different security groups down the actual chain of different groups and organizations within inside of Microsoft. But this customer didn't have that type of high-level security group for everyone at that company. So that's something to think about, as well as how is Active Directory. And honestly, that's not necessarily a Power BI thing directly. I know that like the question was, can Power BI add everyone in there and kind of bypass Active Directory? But then you have to start thinking about, like from an InfoSec perspective of the organization, like, would they want that to happen? If they're controlling security for the organization, they don't want an application to bypass what they're managing from a policy perspective. And so there's a balance there of who's actually managing that security.
For sure. And then, of course, the more that you invoke groups, especially, if it's aligned with someone's role and they change roles in the organization, because some companies have huge problems with every 6, 8, 12 months, people are bouncing around. And so, of course, that helps keep security in Power BI closer to up to date. But it also means from an administration standpoint, you have a little bit more work to say, oh, now I need to go get the members of that group from the Microsoft 365 graph APIs in order to really programmatically figure out, who has access and that sort of thing. So it's just a little bit more work on that side to make it happen, though it could absolutely be worth it, from a a risk perspective.
Yep. Another challenge also is like, so I brought up the RLS role management, is there's not actually a REST API to programmatically manage that. Now, if you're on premium or premium per user, the XMLA endpoint went GA. And one of the things that came with the GA is role management through the XMLA endpoint. So that does offer some capability to script from that perspective. So that is something where you could manage that and automate that. That's somewhat new. So thankfully that's there. I'm hoping at some point maybe there'll be a REST API as well that you can do, like, you know, especially when you're trying to hook into like a DevOps type thing with CI/CD and things of that nature. So there's a gap there as well.
Yeah, I'd like more on the API side for security as a whole, right? To say, I want to be able to build out programmatically end to end, not only workspace security, but the current state of sharing, and you know, kind of the whole thing end to end. So that's something I got my fingers crossed.
So say we all.
Yeah, you talk to the enterprise customers all the time. I'm sure you know well. Yeah.
Yep. Which leads us into our next question. Great connection there from Sam. Recently, we've seen a lower usage level in our reports than expected. Can we obtain a list of all active subscribe to email users have configured for themselves? And so I'll maybe rephrase that a little bit and say, what are the approaches that you recommend in terms of understanding or inventorying who has access to what from a governance standpoint?
Yeah. So certainly, it's an imperfect, not 100% complete state right now, and that's of course because Power BI has its roots in self-service BI, and it's slowly but surely catching up with some of the enterprise BI needs in this area. The first thing that we want to do is, if you're not already capturing your activity log data, start at least capturing it and storing it if you're not already, because it's only available for a certain period of time depending on how you go after the data. And it's easier than ever to get after if you go after the Power BI activity log as opposed to some of the former methods. So that's item number one. Item number two is then start thinking about, do you want to have certain snapshots as of a point in time? So by that, I mean, how about a workspace inventory at the end of every month, right? Or how about your security settings at the workspace level at a certain point in time? And so especially from the security standpoint, even though it's not 100%, between the activity log and the snapshots, we can always back into what happened if we need to do that. And then, of course, you start rounding out with other types of information that you might need to pull from the APIs.
Yep. Yeah, I love what you said about it being an imperfect situation right now. And there's definitely some gaps, especially if we're trying to programmatically get that information. And there's no APIs actually exposed that give you that for certain cases. Also, like the sharing is another aspect where it's hard to get that.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, the current state of sharing, we see that an item is shared in the activity log. We don't know to whom. Mm-hmm. We'd have to go, look in the UI in the Power BI service for that. And if I'm not mistaken, if it's unshared, that's actually not a logged activity.
Correct. So that's why it's not. From the audit log itself, you can't get a complete picture there on that piece. Yeah. So,
still wildly important though in terms of monitoring adoption and really understanding how the system is being used. So, from a governance perspective, I always like to talk about, we're not talking about controlling people. We're talking about empowering people within the guardrails that you need to set, and using that activity log data to understand how are people really using the system, and do we have opportunities there, is a great way to use that data.
Yes. The quote I love from Ronald Reagan, trust but verify.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. All right. Let's see here. All right. So I think we did that. Well, so this kind of piggybacks on it. Nico had one. Can we allocate workspace access to Azure AD groups instead of individual email addresses in the Power BI portal?
You absolutely can, and yes. I have a demo that I show sometimes. And granted, it's not always realistic in the real world to enforce it. However, absolutely you can do that.
Yep. Yep.
V2 workspaces. If you still have the
Yes.
version 1 Office 365 group workspaces, those are not applicable to what
Which
we
you
just said.
should be migrating to V2.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
If you don't have a plan for migrating, do not wait for Microsoft to force the migration, because that will happen at some point here. What you want to do is slowly but surely plan for it, because not only are the features a little bit different, but the security roles are a little bit different and wildly better on the new workspace experience. And you want to make sure after the migration, you have people classified where you really want them.
Yep. And then, yeah, I had a thought there and then I lost it. Okay. Anyway.
Well, I can't imagine why you actually are also looking at the chat, and I see it blipping by next to me, but I can't possibly listen to you and talk and even pay the slightest bit of attention to what else is going on. So you're doing great.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Speaking of which, Kevin even commented about he needs to learn how to create those monthly snapshots of what you talked about before. So, and that's even from a governance perspective, some of it is, understanding what's out there, but also from implementing it, sometimes it takes some of that repetition to even get it in place, or building that habit and defining those strategies and putting them in place. So that you are consistent in what you're doing instead of just a one-off, I got to remember to go do that. So automating those processes are important.
Steps.
Yep. All right. Let's see. I had a question here. Where was it? So this is Rock of Vendors got one. While using custom visuals, any possibility of loss of data security strategy needs to be considered. And so again, I'll tie this back from a governance perspective. When thinking about custom visuals, I know some organizations are hesitant to use those because they're not quote unquote Microsoft. Some of them are, but some of them are not. What are your thoughts around that?
Yep. So the first thing you want to look at is it certified? But, that does mean that Microsoft's done some initial reviews that nothing nefarious is going on. But a custom visual not being certified does not mean that it's not trustworthy. And that's because certain custom visuals absolutely need to send data back to their service in order to work, right? Anything mapping needs to do that. Anything AI needs to do that. There's a number of very, very valid reasons why. And so that's where you want to start figuring out, is the vendor reputable? And then you can use your organizational visuals area inside the Power BI Admin Center to basically add it there for your folks to be able to use it. And then, they won't. That's assuming, by the way, that you have said in your admin center as well that people are allowed to use custom visuals, but only allowed to use certified visuals. And that's usually, at least from a starting point, and I'm curious if you agree with this, Adam, but usually my starting point is certified visuals plus the specific non-certified ones that are, registered in the org visuals area.
Yeah, and some of the challenge there too is what, how an organization can actually vet or validate, or like internally certify. If it's not a Microsoft certified, how can they certify it? And that would be one thing. Like you can see who the publisher of that custom visual is. So there may be some work that the organization can do to just go out, reach out to the publisher of that certified or of the custom visual to say, hey, can you give me more details about what this visual is actually doing, what it's accessing, or how it's working with the data? And maybe they can give you more information to at least bring some understanding and comfort from an IT perspective to say, yes, this is okay.
Yeah. And then the other aspect to that is a little bit of a lesser known thing is you can also use group policy to control, hey, over in Power BI Desktop, only certified visuals can be used. And that, if you implement that, the big help that makes is people don't do a whole lot of work in Power BI Desktop with whatever visual they chose, only to have it published to the service and then you're disallowed. So it provides that consistency and experience, assuming that you can also be responsive to those exceptions.
Yep. So David is in team certified visuals only. So that's definitely one. I see a lot of enterprise organizations actually taking that approach of like, we will only do certified visuals just from a security and governance perspective. So that it's fair.
Do you see very many companies saying no entirely to certified visual? I'm sorry, to custom visuals?
There are some customers that I know of that will not do any custom visuals at all. They just refuse to do it because it's potentially injecting some code, like even Microsoft custom visuals, like they won't do it. And that's just a policy that they've taken on their end, which does somewhat limit, what you can do because you only have access to the base visuals. So,
right.
And then Rishi commented that the real challenge with restricting custom visuals is that there's no way to see how, where they're being used across the org. So very hard to apply this retrospectively. Yep, that's a good point. So in terms of just understanding that. And I know I've heard other people bring that up too, is like, how can I actually see, yes, I can get an inventory of reports, but I don't need a way to inventory, okay, which reports are using what custom visuals and where that is in the organization. So
yeah. I mean, it doesn't solve the problem you just said, but at least registering it in the organizational visuals means that every individual user isn't saying, oh, I'm going to go grab this visual and I might be on version 1.2 and somebody else is on version 2. You at least are kind of pushing some consistency there, but it doesn't solve what you just stated.
So Alex threw out a link there saying that Tom Martins did an excellent article. That had nothing to do with custom visuals. Sorry, I thought that had, or maybe it did. I don't know. I'll have to go look at that. I haven't seen that article, so I thought it was relevant to the custom visual discussion. Maybe it was, maybe it's not. And then go from, check it out. Either way, it's probably a good article. Matthew, I see you. And I also saw Kevin's comment as well. So Kevin, I see there is a couple of them out there. Let me just look real quick, make sure I didn't miss any others. Kevin said that his question kind of got cut off. So his item here is, he was talking about some of the workspace items. So he's looking for like what resources are out there to set up workspace inventory at the end of every month.
Tell you what, if you move on to another question for a second, let me go find a URL for you and I will pop it in the chat here in just a second.
Ooh, awesome. And I made you a moderator so that you can put links in the chat. So.
Okay. Oh, good. Thanks.
Because only moderators can do that. So.
I see.
So great. Yes. And then so Kevin, while she's finding that link, I'll just give you a tease. Using the PowerShell, Power BI PowerShell commandlets, you can get that information. Obviously, if you don't have that, you got to play with it. I don't know if Melissa's item that she's looking for, it talks about using the PowerShell commandlets to do that. The REST that wraps the REST APIs that give you that inventory. So.
It does. So let me pop this in here. And what it is it's a notebook that it kind of just steps through, initially connecting, initially getting just a little bit of data, and it kind of builds up through, let's get the activity log data. And with something like the workspace snapshots, I go after it two different ways. Do you want to use the actual PowerShell commandlet from the management module, or do you want to use the API? And I, give you a couple different examples that you can step through. It has not been updated since we got support for admin APIs for service principals.
Yes.
So it does rely on, hey, just log in with a domain user, but it's at least kind of a starting point there for you to play with.
Yep. The other thing I'll say, and I know Alex also put a link there to the get workspaces command, be sure to use the $expand that you get all of the assets in there. Otherwise, the amount of calls that you're going to hit some of the throttle limits, especially if you have a lot of content. So make sure you use the $expand.
For sure. And that example is in the notebook that I gave, and it does have a little explanation that says, hey, here's why we want to do it this way.
Yep. And Kevin, you are most welcome. All right. Let's see here. Go to, so Andy had a question here. What permissions do I have to set on the workspace that data sets exist in so that the app with reports that look at those data sets can see the data? Gotta read that again.
Permissions on the workspace that data sets, the apps with reports that look at those data. Okay, so I'm going to actually answer this pretending that the data's in one workspace and the app and the reports are in another workspace, just to kind of say that's a best practice anyway. And so in that respect, if you have read plus build, people will be able to create their own reports from the data set and view the content from the app. And if you allow inside the app, users are allowed to do the little save a copy thing. That build will allow it as well. So you can kind of stop at the read on the data set, or you can go on to the build. Now, let me hold that thought and just see if you have anything to add to that, Adam.
Yeah, so there's a scenario that comes up when you use the build rights. So that does allow users to build off of that. And then if I share my report in another workspace using those build rights and then publish that app, I want to say there's a challenge there where the users hitting that new report in the new workspace that don't have read access to the underlying shared data set will get an error. And they also have to have read access to the underlying data set.
Yeah, I've heard that. And I've kind of got something actually in one of my OneNote notebooks of research this more when I have time. And so, yeah, I have heard that's a current issue.
I've had lengthy discussions on that. And unfortunately, that's kind of the model, how it works right now, is they still need, the base data set still needs to have permissions for the end consumers. Even if it's a shared data set going across to a different workspace, those users need to be accounted for.
Yeah. With just read or read and build?
No, it should just be, so only the person creating the report needs build access. It's the end consumers would just need like viewer or something like that on the base data set.
Yep.
So, yep.
And, while we're talking about delivering content in an app briefly, a lot of times that kind of content might be certified and it might be branded to indicate as such, right? That it's validated or produced by such and such team or have a specific symbol, anything of that nature. And so one of the challenges that we get into from a governance standpoint is when people are allowed to do that save as sort of functionality from content that is branded. And so one of my favorite ways to get around that is to actually not allow the save as from within the app, and instead on the app menu, deliver a nice separate starter PBIX file that has the branding removed, and it's more work for whomever owns the content, but it's a little bit safer downstream for your self-service people.
Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely. Okay. So Renato's got a question here, and I think when we talked the other day, you kind of mentioned some of this, so it'd be interesting to get your thought on this. Can you explain the importance of the integration of Azure Purview and the Power BI service?
Oh, yeah. So I've been playing with this a bit these last few weeks, and I have so many things teed up to blog and so little time. But
and also, before you go into that, Catherine also added a very similar question on, it ties into it. So how do you see Azure Purview affecting, changing, or complementing Power BI governance? We can maybe cover all of that.
All right. So let me first state that in the world of governance, we are focused on things like data democratization and data discovery. And if we hone in on just the piece of data discovery, knowing that it exists and not having to go ask Joe that, where do I find such and such? And that's where we start thinking about Purview. And Purview is more than a data catalog. But that's the piece that in terms of relating to Power BI right now is the most relevant piece. So if we think about back over in the Power BI service right now, one thing that they have released recently is a datasets hub. So someone that's looking to create reports can see across workspaces what data is available. The thing is, though, is that inside of Power BI world, you have to have permissions for anything to be exposed. So that actually doesn't really solve the data discovery issue. So if we move over to something like Purview, and we've asked Purview to scan our Power BI tenant, and we've asked it to, basically create an inventory of all of the objects, workspace, data sets, data flows, reports, etc. You give someone read access to Purview to be able to then see which items exist. So if they're looking for that sales data, what they actually see in Power BI and what they see in Purview, Purview is broader. Now, having said that, what actually happens if they want access to something is they go ask to click it, view it in Power BI. If they don't have access, it creates a workflow to the owner and says, hey, so-and-so is asking for access. Do you want to grant it? And so really it's only the metadata that's exposed. So I feel like that's the biggest role that Purview can play right now is in the data discovery side of things. And it does do more. But the big but right now is that if you give someone read access to Purview, it is everything registered to Purview because there's no additional access control inside of it. So you have to make it so that you allow them to see the existence of everything that's registered in that Purview account. Unlike Azure Data Catalog Gen 1, we can have multiple Purview accounts in the same Azure tenant, so that might sometimes be a solution, but it's so new that I don't really quite know how that's going to shake out. And then the other thing that I'll mention about it is that something like the lineage view right now is very much superior in the Power BI side as compared to the Purview side, if we're only talking about Power BI. If we're talking about also seeing that it came from, say, Azure Data Factory and landed in Azure SQL Database and it's expanded beyond Power BI, then Purview starts having a bit of an advantage there from a lineage perspective.
But it'd be interesting to also see the updates both on the Azure Purview side, which is still in preview, and then
and it's very, very young.
Yep. Yeah. And what happens on the lineage view integrations and the other integrations on the Power BI side as well. So I'm sure it's going to be a journey on that front, and gotta
absolutely
stay tuned to that.
Yep, I'm excited.
Yep. All right. So we got a little time. Alex, thank you so much for the super emote. Very much appreciated. And Matthew is having a little fun in the chat also. So that is good. And Mr. Chris Finland is there as well. Wondering why Patrick looks different because he just joined. So let's see here. Going into the more of the questions here. Let's see. So Mr. Let's see. There was one I saw. I'm trying to find it. Let's go with. Let's go. I think we did one. Did we do? Yes. Okay. Sorry. I'm trying to keep up here. Mr. Will has got a question here. What are the considerations for a decision to put a workspace on Gen 2 storage or not? So I think...
Are we talking about upgrading premium to Gen 2?
No, I think what he means is now because you can do the Azure Data Lake storage from a tenant perspective, as well as at the workspace level. So maybe my interpretation of that is, where do you make that judgment call of when to allow individual workspaces to attach to storage versus from a tenant level perspective?
Okay, so Azure Data Lake storage, got it. So I think there's two sides of it here. You've got, in the admin center, you've got, let's hook up our tenant in Power BI to Azure Data Lake storage just to initially say, I want to bring my own data lake. And then you've got a checkbox that says, I will allow or open the door to individual workspaces being able to connect up their own data lakes. And that gets appealing in the decentralized or the larger organizations where they might not want to put their data in the same data lake as the tenant. And so the big thing there to watch out for is that, when you go into workspace settings and you say, okay, I want to hook this up with a data lake storage account, the big kicker there is that regardless of what you have set in the admin settings, there's no automatic default happening with the workspaces. So you still have to go set it workspace by workspace. And unless something's changed recently, so correct me if I'm wrong here, Adam, but if you've already created any data flows, and then you want to hook up a specific workspace, as far as I know, that's still not allowed, and that we need to set that configuration before we start creating the data flow.
Yeah, I believe that's true, because then it would have to do like data movement under the hoods, and that would be problematic. So I believe that's the way it works.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where, maybe if you know, this is a whole nother subject, if you have workspace creation locked down or not, but when the workspace is initially created, should it be associated with a specific data lake account? And if so, is it the tenant one or an individual one is a checklist item.
Yep. And then the other thing to consider there too is other items that fall in line with that. So this isn't necessarily specific to the Azure Data Lake storage, because some of the bring your own log analytics items as well, hopefully will eventually come down to the workspace level as well. So some of that Azure integration in general, both from a tenant level and a workspace level, of just how to approach that, how to manage that, and understanding who has access to what.
Yeah, for sure. Because, you know, within Power BI, there's certain things we can set up and manage from a decentralized way pretty well. And then there's other things that just don't fit that model very well, you know, tenant settings kind of being at the top of the list there. So absolutely agreed.
All right, so we are bumping up against the top or the end of the live stream, but there's one more question I want to throw out there from Jeff Johnston, new member. So thank you very much for that. Does the platform provide the ability to prevent import models for workspaces deemed sensitive? And so, like, how do we understand sensitive data and accessing and whatnot?
No, to be able to prevent an import model, that's not something that's configurable. And I can't predict, but I wouldn't imagine that Microsoft would go that way, because it would just be so limiting. But what we can do is figure out, you know, what that sensitivity label is assigned there. And that, of course, hooks up with initially in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center is where we would define those. We've got some policies, and there's a couple different ways to do it, but we can start implementing things that make sure that the data is not going to go where we don't want it to go. So for example, you could use Cloud App Security as an example to forbid it being on unencrypted devices, or disallow it from being downloaded is a big one. I've got a demo that does that. So we wouldn't prevent it from being imported into Power BI at all, but we could, in fact, either limit what happens or for sure audit what happens to it afterwards.
Excellent. Love it. All right. So with that, we will say goodbye to everyone. Just a last shout out here. Just be sure to go to check out Melissa's website, Coates Data Strategies, for more information. Check out the workshop. I'm sure it's going to be jam-packed. It's over much longer than 1 hour, so I'm sure there's a lot more information there that we just didn't even cover and touch on in this hour. Yeah. And Susan, I put it up before.
I've been expanding it a lot content-wise from anybody that saw it in recent months as well. So
yep. Susan made I put it up a little bit, that her brain hurts now, and someone made the comment of saved over 25 links out of this. So. Lots of good info. Glad everyone was able to spend their Saturday with us. Patrick will be back next Saturday. And Melissa, again, thank you so much for spending time with us. I know I learned some things, and I'm from the chat. Everyone else did as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And bye, everybody. Have a good one.
All right, everyone. We will see you next week and in our other videos. Have a great rest of your weekend.